Intel does not recommend overclocking budget Alder Lake processors and may release a patch for the BIOS. Last week, the well-known overclocker Dare 8 Hour discovered the possibility of overclocking budget Alder Lake processors by increasing the multiplier on the motherboard and unlocking the BCLK value, link 1 and link 2. An inexpensive 6-core Core i5-12400 is used, and as a result, it was possible to raise the clock frequency of the state employee to 5.2 GHz on a motherboard with a Z690 chipset, which made it possible to bypass the more expensive Ryzen 7 5800X in the SimbenchR 20 multi-core test. A few days later, Dare 8 Hour repeated its feat, but this time it used an inexpensive motherboard based on the B660 chipset. The overclocker not only showed the overclocking process, but also shared some details. This means that any owner of similar components can now squeeze much more out of them, which greatly alarmed Intel. Apparently, the possibility of overclocking budget processors turned out to be a complete surprise for Intel itself. Allegedly, this was a mistake that the engineers simply did not notice. Since the manufacturer is not happy with what is happening, there is every reason to expect a software patch that will lead to a complete overclocking lock in the BIOS. Intel insists that an attempt to go beyond the standard clock frequency for the user will result not only in loss of warranty, but also problems with the motherboard and other components. It is likely that a processor operating beyond its capabilities will cause other components to fail, which will also be out of warranty due to user misconduct. In the best case scenario, you will lose system stability, as well as reduce the service life of both the processor itself and related components. Intel is serious and clearly does not want to get tens of thousands of burnstones, which is simply unrealistic to determine the cause of failure. The fact is that even if the processor burns down, it will be extremely difficult to prove the user's guilt. That is why we expect the patch to be released in the very near future. If you are already overclocking the Alder Lake series processor, then either stop doing this, as Intel advises, or disable the ability to automatically update the BIOS. If you do not take any action, the clock speed will soon drop to its normal values. Many of our readers were satisfied with the opportunity to overclock the processor. Especially for them, we remind you that the process is not as simple as it may seem. Keep in mind that increasing the multiplier increases not only the clock speed of the processor itself, but also the RAM. Thus, you should carefully study the video using the links listed above. Otherwise, you'll end up with a burnt out motherboard before you can even take advantage of overclocking the new gem.